Welcome to the Unique History channel. Today we'll be doing a cover-to-cover reading of the book Fascism and Agriculture by G.P. Nunn. And it was published by British Union of Fashion Publications, London, circa 1935. Agricultural Policy by C.P. Nunn. Political Treachery. None of the old political parties has a true interest of the agriculture at heart. The Liberals were the original culprits who ruined British agriculture 100 years ago in pursuit of their political feud with the Conservative Party. It was under their pressure, and on the account of their agitation, that the Corn Laws were replaced, and the British farmer left defenseless against the competition of cheap foreign foodstuffs. With the typical hypocrisy of Liberals contended, they brought to gain cheap bread for the poorer classes, when in fact the whole scheme was a political maneuver to deprive the old Tory landowners of their wealth and power in favor of rising manufacturing classes and enriched by the Industrial Revolution. In this real object, the Liberals were successful indeed, not only crippling the financial strength of the Tory landlords, but ruining British agriculture for generations. The Socialists were not much better, for they have based their strength upon the industrial workers who wish for cheap food. The only interest the Socialists have shown in the countryside has been to demand higher wages for agricultural workers without explaining how the impoverished farmer is to pay them. Furthermore, the lukewarm Labour Party loom the Red Revolutionaries who favor nationalization of the land and collectivization. Increased home market. Obviously, a full measure of protection will guarantee the farmer much higher prices than he can obtain day to day, and it may be contended that this will lead to reduced consumption and suffering among the low-paid industrial workers of the towns. The answer to this objection is that fascism will, through the institution of the corporate state, raise the standard of life of the British people to a much higher level, to a level perfectly justified by the great advance in technical production. Higher wages and salaries will be paid, the higher prices which are necessary to restore the prosperity of the land. Furthermore, the elimination of those middlemen who at the present take an excessive profit from the distribution of foodstuffs will give the farmer better prices without raising costs to the consumer. Fascism stands to build a wide home market sufficient to absorb the increased output and the reorganized farming industry behind effective protective barriers to eliminate foreign exploitation of this new market. Increased home production. The people of this country purchase each year approximately 154 million pounds worth of foodstuff. Rather less than half, about 200 million pounds, are produced in this country. 200 million British pounds come from foreign countries, and 140 million pounds from our dominions and colonies. Experts assure us that it is possible to double the production of British agriculture. This will enable us to cut out foreign competition in foodstuffs altogether, raising home production to 400 million pounds. The remainder could then come entirely from empire sources. Actually, as we have just explained, the home market could be very much increased under the corporate state management, and there will be a higher rate of home consumption of foodstuffs, allowing further expansion of Dominion supplies when the foreigner is excluded from the market. The Conservatives enjoy the greater part of the farming vote, but after all, any more to be trusted than the other parties. Once, it is true, the Tories had stood for the landed interests. During the past century, they have turned gradually, under the leadership of such men such as Disraeli and Baldwin, to move more lucrative into the field of big business and high finance, especially the latter. But the interests of the international finance are absolutely opposed to home agriculture. Farmers were promised many things by the present government, but they still find foreign produce coming in at low prices to compete against them. It is time they realize, for example, that the City of London has 360 million pounds invested in the Argentine, and the interest on that money, in some 20 million pounds a year, comes to this country in the form of agricultural produce, especially chilled beef. Here we clearly see the power of international finance in creating the decadence in a once patriotic party. The Conservative Party, once a party of the land, now become a mere instrument of the City of London, and the farmer must place his political allegiance elsewhere. Real protection. Fascism is prepared to grant British agriculture fully adequate protection from foreign competition. Our policy will be able to put home agricultural first and dominion agricultural second, and only go to the foreigner for what is not available within the empire. The means of protection will be noted by tariff barriers, which can be frequently evaded by subsidies or exchange manipulation. But the progressive reduction of foreign imports until we reach complete exclusion of foreign produce behind a protected barrier of this kind of farmer will be able to recover his long-lasting prosperity. Back to the land. Fascism will not be content with merely maintaining the present amount of home production, but will raise the agricultural output to a maximum. By bringing every available acre of good arable land under cultivation and raising the standard of cultivation, present agricultural production can be doubled. This will mean not only that we can produce 200 million pounds more foodstuff in this country, but we can directly or indirectly work for at least 1 million of our present unemployed. We advocate this policy not only from an economic standpoint, but also we favor a back to the land movement that will take the young men of our nation off the streets and on our industrial cities and bring them back to a more healthy and natural mode of life in the countryside. Export trade. Mr. Walter Elliott, speaking a few months ago in the House of Commons, admitted that he could find employment for very much a large number of men in British agriculture, but if that he did, so he would be destroying the basis upon which a large part of our export trade is built. He meant by this that if we were to grow much more of our food supplies in this country, we should buy less from abroad and the foreigners would take less of our exports in return. This is an entirely erroneous argument, as the purchase of foodstuff from our own farming industry in this country would create the same amount, if not more, purchasing power if we buy these same foodstuffs from abroad. Instead of exporting goods in return to the foreigner produce, we could at least sell the same quantity of goods to our own farming industry. And we should have the great advantage of supplying a market in which we have full control and where we give the adequate protection against foreign competition. Those industries will now depend upon the export trade, which would turn their energies to the new home market. No doubt a certain reorganization would be necessary to meet a different form of demand, but we cannot expect to escape from our present economic difficulties without some sort of reconstruction on the part of our industrialists, town and country. In the past, farmers and industrial workers regarded each other with enmity and distrust, although in fact they can sacredly be two sections of the community whose interests are directly allied. The masses of workers in Britain form the best customers of the British agriculture. It is the English working man who, when he can afford it, eats the good English roast beef and drinks the good English beer, while the rich industrialist is dining off the Russian caviar, roast pheasant, Hawaiian pineapple, and washed down with expensive foreign wines. Yet the farmers for generations have supported conservative politicians who have stood for low wages for the workers of the town, compelling them to buy cheap foreign meat from abroad to cut down their consumption of all better quality homegrown foodstuffs. For example, today the marketing schemes of the national government aim at regulating the sale of milk, but the drastic cuts in economies of the same government have meanwhile deprived hundreds of thousands of town children of their daily milk. Under fascism, for the first time, the farmer will have the opportunity of joining the hands of his natural ally, the town worker, without fear of unpatriotic socialism or a threat to his traditional land tenure. Once again, fascism breaks through the class barriers and reveals the common interests of town and country, and the value of cooperation between these two for their own mutual benefit. Agricultural credit. For a long time now, agriculture has suffered the lack of adequate financial assistance, the financiers of the City of London have found it more profitable to build up the agricultural production of foreign countries such as the Argentine, and no one within recent years has ever heard of them having raised a loan for the benefit of the British farmer. Under this anti-national policy will be brought to an end, and the financial sources of the city will be directed primarily to the maintenance of the prosperous agriculture at home. Special agricultural banks will be set up by which means the farming community will be able to finance the higher agricultural output which fascism tends to implement. Advances will not only be made upon the security of the land and buildings, but also in the form of advances upon produce, which will be redeemable through cooperative farming machinery. Incentively, in this manner, the farmer will be relieved of his indebtedness to middlemen, which is one of the main causes of his present distress. Agricultural labor. It is notorious that the wages of the agricultural labor are practically the lowest in this whole country. Basic rates amounting to an average of 30 shillings weekly. This is an impossible state of affairs, which is forcing many active and energetic young men to abandon the countryside and move to cities where higher wages are available. With the restoration under fascism of prosperity to agriculture, one of the first measures of the new agricultural corporation would be to raise the wages of the agricultural labor more in keeping with those paid in towns. Farm work is an exceedingly skilled occupation, which deserves much higher remuneration than it gets today. We only have to compare the knowledge and the experience required from the farmhand with that needed under mass production methods in the modern factory to realize how unfairly the agricultural laborer is treated today. No blame for this, however, rests upon the fortunate farmer, who is himself barely able to make a living, but upon the bad economic system and the constant neglect of agriculture by successful governments. The restoration under fascism of prosperity to the countryside will benefit not only the landowner, but the tenant farmer, but will be equally shared by the farm producer and his family. When better prices for farm produce make it possible for the farmer to pay a higher economic wage. Hereditary land tenure. Fascism is convinced that hereditary land tenure of the past is the best means to whereby the stability of the countryside can be maintained and its prosperity restored. Death duties have already been broken up of the many great estates and ruined what was once good in the feudal tradition of the past. Fascism will restore the tradition of land passing down the same family from generation to generation, proving that the heir proves himself to be fitted to develop the land with the best purpose. The essential feature of feudal society was that the privilege was always associated with the obligation. The local squire enjoyed the respect and loyalty of his tenants, but on the other hand, he owed them a duty in return, and he could always turn to him in a time of distress or trouble for the assistance or advice. It is that vanishing tradition that the cooperation of fascism will restore to the countryside. Land universalization. At present, a great deal of the land is being kept out of cultivation because it is owned by rich men who prefer to use it as parkland or for other private purposes. Under fascism, the ownership of the land will be regarded as carrying an obligation towards the nation, and that this land is used for the best natural purpose. The landowner will be held responsible for the good use and stewardship of his land, and his rental charge will be regarded as payment for the management of the estate and the maintenance of the fixed capital on the land, such as farm buildings, cottages, roads, fences, and other facilities. According to the law, there is no absolute land ownership in England, which is held either directly or indirectly by the crown. Fascism will restore this traditional right to more effective use, to where the landowner is guilty of neglecting his land or failing to put it to good natural use or absenting himself without good runs of time. The government will be prepared to advise the crown to resume possession without compensation and transfer it to the state to a farming corporation for its proper utilization in the national interest. The farming corporation. In common with all other industries in a corporate state of fascism, agriculture will be controlled by the corporation, on which will sit representatives of landowners, farmers, and agricultural workers. The country will be zoned to a number of areas in which local councils within the corporation will sit and control and regulate the local farming. The advantages of such an arrangement for agriculture are almost incalculable, and by this means our agricultural production can be planned for the first time. At present, owing the complete lack of cooperation, gluts of fruits and vegetables occur very frequently, owing each farmer laying down what he thinks fit of each variety of produce. The farming corporation will make its first duty to collect statistics of production and issue advice as to amounts of different varieties to be produced to prevent both scarcity and glut. The corporation would be determine rents and wages in accordance with the prosperity of the industry and can prevent disputes arising among the various factions of the agricultural production, and this can, for the first time, be planned. Cooperative marketing. By the means of the farming corporation, the farmers would also be enabled to market their production cooperatively without the intervention of the government scheme. Buyers' rings and all obstructive middlemen would thus be eliminated, and the farmers cooperate. The corporation would determine rents and wages in coordination with the prosperity of the industry and prevent disputes arising among the various factors of the agricultural production. By the means of the farming corporation, the farmers would also be enabled to market their production cooperatively without the intervention of any government scheme. Buyers' rings and all other obstructive middlemen thus be eliminated, and the farmers cooperate as a body, would deal directly with markets in the big city. Marketing schemes at the present are extremely unpopular owing to the failure of milk and pig marketing proposals of the present government. These schemes were doomed by failure owing to the fact that the present system makes it impossible to raise the purchasing power of the consumer without marketing cannot possibly exceed. Under fascism, cooperative marketing will be part of the corporate structure of the state. Not as any at present isolated experiment, it will be fully under control of the farmers themselves. A further function of the farming corporation will be able to maintain agricultural research stations which give free advice to farmers throughout the country in modern technique of agriculture, and equip training centers where members of the agricultural industry can undergo courses of instruction. The advance of agriculture is so important for the welfare of the community that the technical problems involved in such complexity that fascism regards such technical college as a necessity. Indeed, a fascist government would not begrudge a generous subsidy to place the resources of modern scientific research at the disposal of British agriculture. Titles. Whatever their justification in the Middle Ages, at their time of the first institution, titles have become a day-to-day anarchism. Originally, they were charged upon agriculture and the chief industry of this country for the support of the national church. Today, they only apply to what has become the Cinderella of our national industries in the midst of immense commercial enterprise to which the Industrial Revolution gave rise. Furthermore, although originally calculated as a percentage of produce by the Title Act of 1925, titles became fixed at a money value which is rapidly becoming regarded as an ordinary debt charge. This breach with the very tradition upon which titles can be upheld. Since 1925, the agricultural produce has dropped considerably in value, with the result of the title change in the terms of produce production in which the farmer deals have now become very increased. No industry can afford to go on paying out such large sums as they without any adequate return in the form of service, and at the very least a moratorium should be now granted pending roundtable conference to advise the 1925 Act. The present government is always prepared to grant a moratorium to any foreign power which professes to be unable to pay its debts. And there is no reason that the same dispute should not be allowed in our own farming industry. A fascist government would actually allow much further than this and would abolish titles altogether as an unjust burden upon the agriculture. Because fascism believes that if the state wants national church, the state should support out of general revenue and thus distribute the burden equitably over the industries in the country, and as attention with titles for First Institute. Okay, thank you. That is the full reading of Fascism and Agriculture.